So it's important to look at these men who God chose, because God didn't choose what we would consider to be the best of the best. He didn't choose the top shelf, most gifted, most talented. Actually, he chose a motley crew of people. And there's a lot of encouragement for us in that, because God is not necessarily looking for ability. God is looking for availability. God isn't necessarily looking for the best and the brightest. He's looking for people who will trust simply. So let's look at who he chose. Look at who he called. It begins, of course, with Peter. Peter is always the first in every list of the apostolic band. Remember his name was Simon, which means shifting sand, and Jesus changed his name to Peter, which means a rock. And it's interesting that a rock is really, biologically, it's really just a lot of sand and it's lumped together to make it solid. Peter, of course, suffered from foot and mouth disease, didn't he? Peter had a foot-shaped mouth. It's like almost every time Peter opened his mouth, he said something that was a bit silly. I mean, think about it. Do you remember when Jesus said, well, who do men say that I am? And the disciples said, listen, some people say that you're Jeremiah, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, one of the prophets. He says, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, listen, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, Peter, flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you. My Father who's in heaven did. Now, at that moment, Peter's thinking, I got myself a conference speaking schedule on the horizon. I mean, I received revelation from the Father. I mean, this is serious, right? It's a business conference. You know what I mean? Like, it was a triumphant moment for Peter. I mean, can you imagine that? You're sitting with Jesus, you say something like, man, you didn't just come up with that on your own. My Father revealed that to you. You'd be like, psh, yeah. You can put up a website. Jesus said, my Father revealed that to you. You'd be getting calls for the biggest conferences in the world. But what happens right after Peter's glorious moment? They confess that he's the Christ. And Jesus says, well, listen, I'm going to go to the cross. And what does Peter say? Far be it from you, Lord. And how does Jesus respond to Peter? Get behind me, Satan. It's like, he just made it, man. He was done. His whole life was set ahead of him, right there. My Father revealed to you, and then the next minute he's like, get behind me, Satan. Doesn't that encourage you? God knew that Peter was gregarious and impetuous, but yet he still chose him. Because as we go on in the book of Acts, we're going to see God's going to use Peter in powerful ways. He's going to preach on the day of Pentecost, and 3,000 people are going to know Jesus. He's going to be the first one who goes to the Gentiles. And he's so freaked out by it when he goes to the Jerusalem council. He's just like, look, it really wasn't my fault. They called, and God told me to go, and I went, and then I told them about Jesus, and the Holy Spirit fell. Oh, what am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? It's awesome. But see, God doesn't choose perfect people because there are none. He chooses people who are available. You know what I love about Peter also? Do you remember when Jesus was resurrected and they decided to go fishing? And Jesus shows up on the seashore? Peter realizes it's Jesus, and what does he do? He jumps in the lake and swims to the shore. The other guys, Andrew, James, and John, they start rowing back. You can imagine those guys. You know what I mean? They're rowing back, and there's Peter just like, oh, Jesus. Those guys are like, hey, Pete, they're rowing back. Peter actually makes it to the shore after the other guys do. So Peter he's just messing up all over the place. It's like he's just gregarious and impetuous, but yet still God chose him. He was a fisherman. And listen, fishermen weren't like the Quakers of Jesus' day. Sometimes you think about the disciples, they're all sitting around singing Kumbaya in Hebrew or something, and all of a sudden Jesus showed up. He was a rough and tumble fisherman. You can read stories about fishermen in Alaska. They're not exactly just like the most quaint and quiet bunch. But God chose Peter.